The Kingdom by the Window. Chapter 1. The Throne. For 9 years, 11 months, and approximately 17 days, I had been the undisputed monarch of the southeast corner of Pinehaven Public Library. My kingdom wasn't large. Just one worn leather armchair positioned precisely where the morning light filtered through the window, illuminating the pine forest beyond. But it was mine. Every morning at 9 sharp, I would push through the library's heavy oak doors, nod to Martha at the circulation desk, pour myself a cup of black coffee from the machine that had been sputtering since the Clinton administration, and settle into my throne. The routine was as essential to me as breathing. After Margaret passed, routines became the scaffolding that held up my days. Without them, I suspected I might simply collapse into myself like a poorly constructed tent. That particular Tuesday in January started like any other. The snow had been falling since dawn, thick and silent, the kind that made the whole world feel muffled and new. I'd cleared my driveway with the same methodical precision. I applied to everything, left my boots by the door at exactly 8:47, and arrived at the library at 8:58. 2 minutes early. Perfect. I hung my coat on the rack, prepared my coffee. 2 stirs, no sugar, no cream. I'm not an animal. And turned toward my corner with the pleasant anticipation of a man about to sit down in his favorite chair after a long day. Except it wasn't a long day. It was the beginning of a day. And someone was sitting in my chair. I stopped so abruptly that coffee sloshed over the rim of my mug and onto my hand. I didn't notice. I was too busy staring at the woman who had committed what I can only describe as a territorial violation of the highest order. She was perhaps a few years younger than my 73, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and a blue cardigan that looked hand-knit. She sat with perfect posture, reading the Pinehaven Gazette as if she owned the place. As if I didn't exist. I cleared my throat. Nothing. I cleared it again, louder this time, with the kind of authority that had once commanded respect in boardrooms across the Northeast. She turned a page. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady despite the coffee now cooling on my knuckles. "I believe you're sitting in my chair." She looked up then, her eyes a startling shade of blue behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Your chair?" She had a slight accent I couldn't quite place. British, maybe, or Australian. Somewhere that produced women with an alarming amount of composure. "Yes. My chair. I sit here every morning. Have done for nearly 10 years. She folded her newspaper with maddening precision and set it on her lap. "How interesting. I don't see your name written on it." I blinked. "I'm sorry. Your name? Surely if this chair belongs to you, there would be some indication. A plaque, perhaps. Or at minimum, your initials carved into the armrest like a schoolboy claiming a desk." My mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. In all my years, no one had ever challenged my claim to this chair. Martha knew it was my chair. The other regulars knew it was my chair. Even the teenagers who came in after school to use the computers knew better than to sit in Arthur Donnelly's chair. "It's an unwritten rule," I said finally. "Ah." She picked up her newspaper again. "Then I suppose I can be forgiven for not reading it." And just like that, she went back to her reading. I stood there for a full minute, possibly longer, waiting for her to acknowledge the absurdity of the situation. She didn't. She simply sat in my chair, in my spot, during my time, reading the newspaper I usually read. Also mine, by the way. I was the one who'd suggested the library subscribe to the Gazette in the first place. Finally, with as much dignity as I could muster, I retreated to the chair beside mine. It was identical in every way except the one that mattered. It wasn't mine. The coffee tasted bitter. The light was all wrong. And when I tried to read my book, The Count of Monte Cristo, which I reread every few years. The words swam on the page. Across the small table between us, the woman turned another page of my newspaper. I had lived through recessions, the loss of my wife, and 3 different presidential administrations that tested my blood pressure. I had survived all of it with my sanity intact. But this was war. Chapter 2. The Early Bird Strategy. The next morning, I arrived at 8:30. Martha looked up from her computer with obvious surprise. "Arthur? You're early." "Just eager to get to my reading," I said pleasantly, though my jaw was clenched so tight I could have cracked walnuts with my molars. I poured my coffee with trembling hands. Partly from the cold, partly from the satisfaction of knowing I'd won this round. And walked to my corner. Empty. Victory was mine. I settled into the chair with a sigh of contentment, opened my book, and had just found my place when I heard the library doors open. She walked in at 8:45, shaking snow from her shoulders, and stopped when she saw me. For a moment, we simply stared at each other. I raised my coffee cup in a small salute. Her eyes narrowed. She poured herself tea. Tea, in a coffee mug, which seemed somehow sacrilegious. And sat in the chair beside mine without a word. I'd expected anger. Protests. Perhaps a strongly worded complaint to Martha. Instead, she pulled out a hardcover novel and began reading as if I wasn't there. The silence stretched between us like taffy. "Nice morning," I said finally, because apparently I'm the kind of person who makes small talk with his enemies. "Is it?" She didn't look up from her book. "The snow's quite beautiful. If you like that sort of thing." "Most people do." "I'm not most people." Well, that much was obvious. I returned to my book, but the words might as well have been in Sanskrit. I was too aware of her presence. The way she turned pages. Too quickly, as if she wasn't really absorbing the content. The slight clicking sound her teacup made when she set it down. Irritating. The faint scent of lavender that drifted from her direction. Actually quite pleasant, but I wasn't about to admit it. At 10:30 she stood, gathered her things, and left without a word. I watched her go, feeling simultaneously victorious and oddly deflated. The next morning, I arrived at 8:15. She was already there, sitting in my chair, reading the newspaper. She looked up when I entered and smiled. Actually smiled. "Good morning, Arthur," she said. I froze halfway through removing my coat. "How do you know my name?" "Martha told me. I'm Eleanor, by the way. Eleanor Ashworth." I didn't want to know her name. Names made people human, and I preferred to think of her as simply the chair thief, or possibly that insufferable woman. "Mrs. Ashworth," I began. "Miss," she corrected. "Never married. Came close once, but he had terrible taste in literature. Deal breaker, I'm afraid." Despite myself, I felt a twitch at the corner of my mouth that might have been the beginning of a smile. I suppressed it immediately. "Miss Ashworth, I don't know what time you arrived this morning, but I think we both know this is getting ridiculous." "Is it?" She folded the newspaper. "I rather think it's quite reasonable. You want the chair. I want the chair. First come, first served. It's democracy in action." "This isn't democracy. This is competition." She raised an eyebrow. "I thought you'd be familiar with that concept. Martha mentioned you used to be in business. Some kind of executive." I had been VP of operations for a manufacturing firm, but I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of knowing that. "What I used to be," I said stiffly, "is irrelevant. What matters is that I've been sitting in that chair for 10 years. And now I've been sitting in it for 3 days. In another 10 years, I'll have just as much claim to it as you do. Unless, of course, you're planning to outlive me. She smiled sweetly. Though I should warn you, my grandmother lived to 104. Good genes, you see. I opened my mouth, closed it, poured my coffee with shaking hands and sat in the wrong chair. She went back to her newspaper. This was going to be a long winter. Chapter 3. The Escalation. The war evolved quickly. I started varying my arrival time. 8, 7:45, even 7:30 once, though that required getting up before dawn and I'm not as young as I used to be. She matched me move for move. If I arrived at 7:45, she'd be there at 7:40. If I came at 8:15, so did she. At 8:10. Martha started keeping a tally on a piece of paper she thought we couldn't see. Current score. Eleanor 14, Arthur 11. I did not appreciate being quantified. One morning, I arrived to find Eleanor's blue scarf draped over the chair. A clear attempt to claim it while she was off doing God knows what. Probably plotting my demise. I picked up the scarf, walked it over to the lost and found box, and deposited it with great ceremony. When Eleanor returned 15 minutes later and found me in her saved seat, her expression could have curdled milk. "That was my scarf," she said. "Was it? How careless of you to lose it. I'm sure Martha will help you check the lost and found." "I didn't lose it. I left it here. On a chair that, as you've reminded me repeatedly, has no name written on it." For a moment, I thought she might actually laugh. Instead, she retrieved her scarf from the box, sat down in the other chair, and pulled out a book. 2 days later, I tried the same tactic with my reading glasses. She picked them up, examined them, and then set them precisely 2 inches to the left of where I'd placed them. Message received. The library staff began to take bets. I overheard Marcus, the young assistant librarian, offering 3-to-1 odds that Eleanor would crack first. Martha took him up on it, betting on me. I was oddly touched and simultaneously offended. We never spoke during our morning sessions. We sat in our respective chairs. Mine or the inferior substitute, depending on who'd won that day's race. Drank our beverages. Coffee for me, tea for her. And read in pointed silence. Yet I found myself increasingly aware of her presence. The soft sound of her breathing, the way she tilted her head when she was concentrating, the small furrow that appeared between her eyebrows when she read something that displeased her. Once, I caught myself about to ask what she was reading. I quashed the impulse immediately. We were enemies, not friends. But the truth was, the library felt different now. Less like a sanctuary and more like, well, like something. I wasn't sure what. A battlefield, certainly. But also somehow more alive than it had been in years. Not that I was enjoying it, of course. Absolutely not. Chapter 4. The Ceasefire That Wasn't. 3 weeks into our war, Pine Haven was hit by the kind of snowstorm that made old-timers talk about the winter of '78. 6 inches fell overnight, and it was still coming down at dawn. I considered staying home. My driveway would need clearing. The roads would be treacherous. And truly, at my age, was a chair worth risking life and limb? Yes. Yes, it was. I arrived at 8 to find the library dark. A sign on the door read, "Delayed opening due to weather. Will open at 10 a.m. I stood there in the snow, feeling ridiculous and vindicated in equal measure. At least Eleanor wouldn't get the chair either. Quite the dedication. I turned to find her standing behind me, snow gathering on her blue hat like a halo. Or horns. Definitely horns. "I could say the same to you," I replied. "I suppose we're both fools, then. Speak for yourself." She laughed. Actually laughed. and the sound was unexpectedly pleasant. Like wind chimes or distant bells or something else I wouldn't normally notice. "There's a diner down the street," she said. "Betty's Place. Opens at 7. We could wait there. Get breakfast." I stared at her. "Together? Well, we could sit at separate tables and glare at each other if you prefer. But the booths are quite comfortable, and I hear they make excellent pancakes." I should have said no. This woman was my adversary, my rival, the usurper of my rightful throne. Breaking bread with her would be a betrayal of everything I stood for. "Fine," I heard myself say. "But I'm not sharing a newspaper. I wouldn't dream of it." Betty's Place was warm and smelled like maple syrup and bacon. The scent of every perfect breakfast ever made. We took a booth by the window. Eleanor ordered pancakes. I ordered eggs and toast because I'm not the kind of man who eats pancakes on a Tuesday, thank you very much. For several minutes, we sat in silence. It was different from our library silence, though. Less hostile. More uncertain. "So," Eleanor said finally, cutting into her pancakes with surgical precision. "How long have you lived in Pinehaven?" "All my life. Born here, raised here, probably die here." "That's quite a commitment to one place. Some of us value stability." She raised an eyebrow. "And some of us value new experiences. I've lived in 7 different countries." Despite myself, I was curious. "Why'd you come here?" "My sister lives in the next town over. She's been after me for years to move closer. Finally wore me down." She smiled. "Though I'm starting to wonder if it was a mistake. The locals don't seem very welcoming." "The locals are perfectly welcoming to people who don't steal their chairs. For the last time, it's not your..." She stopped, seeing my expression, and laughed. "You're teasing me." "I don't tease. You absolutely do. You have a tell. The left corner of your mouth twitches." I immediately schooled my features into neutrality. "It does not. There. It just did it again." Our breakfast arrived, giving me an excuse not to respond. We ate in companionable silence. When had it become companionable? Watching the snow fall outside. "It's beautiful," Eleanor said softly. "The snow, I mean. Like the world is starting over." "You said you didn't like snow." "No," I said, "if you like that sort of thing." Which implies I might like it but wasn't ready to admit it to you yet. She smiled. "I'm stubborn that way. I'd never have guessed." There's that twitch again. By the time we finished eating, the snow had stopped and the sun was breaking through the clouds. We walked back to the library together, our footsteps crunching in perfect synchronization. Martha was just unlocking the door. Well, she said, grinning. "Ceasefire?" "Absolutely not," I said. "Never," Eleanor agreed. But as I poured my coffee and she poured her tea, I found myself walking not to my chair but to the one beside it. Eleanor looked at me questioningly. "The light's better from this angle," I lied. "Is it?" She smiled. "How very accommodating of you." "Don't get used to it. I wouldn't dream of it." We sat together, reading in silence, the pine forest stretching out beyond the window like a promise of something I couldn't quite name. Chapter 5. The Empty Chair. For 2 weeks, we maintained our strange détente. I sat in my chair. Eleanor sat in hers. We arrived at varying times, but somehow. And I'm not sure how this happened. We always ended up there at roughly the same moment. As if we developed an internal clock synchronized to each other's rhythms. We didn't talk much. Occasionally, Eleanor would read me a particularly outrageous headline from the Gazette. The town council was apparently debating whether to allow chickens within city limits. Sometimes I'd share an interesting fact from whatever book I was reading. Did you know the Count of Monte Cristo was based on a true story? It was. Pleasant. I hated how pleasant it was. Then, one Thursday morning in February, I arrived at my usual time, which had somehow become 8:30, a compromise neither of us had discussed but both had accepted. And Eleanor wasn't there. Her chair sat empty. I told myself I was relieved. Finally, I could enjoy my morning in peace without her turning pages too loudly or making small humming noises when she read something interesting. She did that. It was infuriating and also somehow endearing, not that I'd ever admit it. But by 9, when she still hadn't arrived, I found myself glancing at the door every few minutes. By 9:15, I was worried. "Martha," I said, approaching the circulation desk with what I hoped was casual disinterest. "Has Eleanor called in sick?" Martha looked up from her computer, concerned. "No. I haven't heard from her." "That's not like her, is it?" It wasn't. In all the weeks we'd been waging our war and subsequent truce, Eleanor had never missed a morning. She was as reliable as sunrise, as consistent as my own carefully maintained routines. "I'm sure she's fine," I said, trying to convince myself as much as Martha. "Probably just overslept." But Eleanor didn't strike me as the kind of woman who overslept. I returned to my chair and tried to read. The words swam on the page. I kept glancing at the entrance, at the empty chair beside me, at the clock that seemed to be moving slower than usual. 920. Still no Eleanor. I was just considering whether I should ask Martha for Eleanor's phone number. A completely reasonable request, nothing to do with the growing anxiety making my hands shake. When I heard it. A heavy thud from outside. The unmistakable sound of something. Or someone. Falling. I was on my feet before I'd consciously decided to move, my book tumbling to the floor. Martha looked up, alarmed, as I rushed past the circulation desk. "Arthur?" "What?" I didn't stop to answer. I pushed through the library doors and out into the cold February morning. Eleanor was crumpled against the stone railing at the base of the steps, her face pale, her blue cardigan dusted with snow. Her bag had spilled open beside her, its contents scattered across the icy steps. My heart, which I'd thought had grown sufficiently calloused after losing Margaret, seized in my chest. "Eleanor." I was at her side in seconds, my knees protesting as I knelt beside her. "What happened? Are you hurt?" She looked up at me, dazed and clearly in pain. "Arthur?" I slipped. On the ice. I think I twisted my ankle." "How long have you been out here?" "Just now. I just fell." She winced as she tried to shift her position. "I was running late. Had to help my sister with something this morning. And I was hurrying up the steps. Wasn't paying attention to the ice and..." She gestured helplessly at her current position. Relief that I'd found her so quickly warred with fear about her injury. "Can you move?" She tried to stand and immediately gasped in pain, her face going even paler. I don't think so." "Stop that. Just sit still." My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. As I waited for the operator to answer, I shrugged out of my coat and draped it over Eleanor's shoulders. "You'll freeze," she protested weakly. "Be quiet. You're going into shock." Martha appeared in the doorway, her hand flying to her mouth when she saw us. "Oh my God. Eleanor. I'll get some blankets." The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes. One of the benefits of small-town living. As the paramedics examined Eleanor's ankle. Sprained, not broken, thank God. I stood nearby, feeling useless and absurdly shaken. If I hadn't heard that sound, if I'd waited even a few more minutes to check on her, she could have been out here in the cold much longer. The thought made my stomach turn. Mr. Donnelly. One of the paramedics, a young woman named Sarah whom I vaguely recognized from the grocery store, touched my arm. We're taking her to County General. Are you family? No, I'm. What was I? Her enemy? Her friend? Her morning companion in silent reading? I'm her. We're library associates. Sarah smiled knowingly. Right. Well, your library associate will be fine. Just needs to stay off that ankle for a few days and keep it elevated. Eleanor was loaded into the ambulance, still wearing my coat. As the doors started to close, she caught my eye. Don't you dare sit in my chair while I'm gone, she called out, managing a weak smile despite the pain. Despite everything. The fear, the cold, the way my heart was still racing. I laughed. Wouldn't dream of it. Chapter 6. The New Routine. Eleanor was right about her genes. She healed with the determination of someone half her age, though her doctor insisted she stay home for at least a week. I knew this because Martha told me, having gotten the information from Eleanor's sister, who'd called the library to explain the absence. For 3 days, I sat in my chair alone. The library felt wrong. Too quiet, too empty, like a house after guests have left and taken all the warmth with them. On the 4th day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I deviated from my routine. At 10, after my morning reading session, I stopped by the circulation desk. Martha, I said. I need Eleanor's address. Martha's face split into a grin that made me immediately regret this decision. Of course you do. Don't. I warned. I didn't say anything. You're thinking it very loudly. She wrote down the address. A cottage on Lakeview Drive, naturally with a view of the lake. And handed it to me with a knowing look I chose to ignore. Then I went to the bakery on Main Street and bought 2 cheese Danish pastries. Eleanor's favorite, I'd learned during one of our breakfast conversations. Finally, I went to the drugstore and picked up a bottle of ibuprofen and one of those gel ice packs. Eleanor's cottage was small and tidy, with blue shutters that matched her cardigan and a garden that probably looked lovely in summer. I stood on the porch for a full minute, wondering what I was doing, before finally knocking. It's open, Eleanor called from inside. I found her on the couch, her foot propped on pillows, surrounded by books and teacups and a laptop playing what appeared to be a British detective show. Arthur? She sat up straighter, surprise and something else. Pleasure. Crossing her face. What are you doing here? I brought you these. I held up the bag with all the grace of a teenage boy on a first date. Danish pastries. And medical supplies. Martha gave me your address. Of course she did. Eleanor smiled. Sit down. You look like you're about to bolt. I sat in the armchair across from her, feeling absurdly nervous. How's the ankle? Healing. Slowly. Doctor says another few days before I can walk properly. She reached for the bag. Are these from Mueller's Bakery? You mentioned once that they were your favorite. I mentioned that. She looked surprised. I didn't think you were listening. I always listen. Even when I'm pretending not to. She laughed, and the sound filled the cottage like sunlight. Would you like tea? I'd get it myself, but... She gestured at her foot. I'll make it. Where's your kitchen? For the next hour, I did something completely foreign to my nature. I improvised. I made tea. Earl Grey 3-minute steeping, splash of milk. I fetched blankets. I adjusted pillows. I even, God help me, agreed to watch 2 episodes of her detective show, which was actually quite good, though I'd never admit it to her face. You don't have to stay, Eleanor said at one point, though her tone suggested she hoped I would. I know. Don't you have library things to do? Books to read? Chairs to defend? The chairs survived this morning thanks to your absence. Besides. I hesitated. Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't do anything stupid, like try to walk on that ankle too soon. Ah. So you're here in an official medical capacity. Exactly. Nothing to do with the fact that you've gotten used to having me around and the library feels empty without me. I opened my mouth to deny it. Closed it. Looked at her sitting there with her silver hair slightly mussed, and her blue eyes twinkling behind her glasses, and felt something shift in my chest. A door I'd kept locked for years creaking slowly open. The library does feel empty, I admitted quietly. Turns out I got used to someone stealing my newspaper. I never stole it. I merely borrowed it while you were busy defending your chair. Semantics. Important semantics. We smiled at each other, and something passed between us. An understanding, an acknowledgement of what we'd both been pretending not to notice. When I finally left, promising to return the next day. I had already decided this, though I pretended I was only agreeing because she needed help. Eleanor caught my hand. Thank you, Arthur. For checking on me. For everything. Well, I said gruffly, uncomfortable with the sudden emotion in her voice. Someone has to make sure you're ready to return to battle. Is that what we're doing? Still battling? I looked at our hands, still linked, and then at her face. Open, honest, waiting. No, I said finally. I don't think we are. Chapter 7. The Kingdom Shared. Eleanor returned to the library the following Monday, walking with a cane that she wielded like a weapon or a scepter. I couldn't decide which. I was already there, sitting in my chair, when she arrived at 8:35. She paused when she saw me, and I could see the question in her eyes. Was I going to claim victory? Point out that her absence had restored my sole ownership of the territory? Instead, I gestured to the chair beside me. Her chair now, I realized. It had been for weeks, though we'd been too stubborn to admit it. Welcome back, I said. She smiled. That full, genuine smile I'd seen so rarely in those first weeks. And sat down with a small sigh of relief. Missed me? She asked. Like a hole in the head. Liar. Your left corner twitched. Did not. Did too. Martha walked past, shaking her head and grinning. You two are impossible. Thank you. Eleanor and I said simultaneously, then looked at each other and laughed. We fell back into our routine, but it was different now. Better. I started arriving at 8:30. Not to beat Eleanor, but because that was when she arrived, and somehow the morning didn't feel properly started until we were both there. We still read in comfortable silence, but now it was punctuated by actual conversation. Eleanor would read me headlines. I would share interesting passages from my books. Sometimes we'd debate plot points or argue about politics. She was liberal. I was conservative. We both enjoyed the sparring. I learned that she'd been a translator for the UN, which explained the accent I could never quite place. It was an amalgamation of everywhere she'd lived. She learned that I'd taken early retirement after Margaret died, unable to face the empty house and even emptier office. You must miss her terribly, Eleanor said one morning, after I'd mentioned Margaret in passing. Every day, I admitted. But less than I did. Time doesn't heal wounds so much as it teaches you to carry them differently. That's very poetic for someone who claims to only read non-fiction and the occasional classic. I read The Count of Monte Cristo. That's very poetic. You read it for the revenge plot, admit it. Well, yes. But there's poetry in revenge too. She laughed, and I realized I'd been engineering moments to make her laugh, storing them up like treasures. One morning in late March, as the snow finally began to melt and the first hints of spring appeared in the pine forest beyond our window, Eleanor set down her book and looked at me seriously. "Arthur, I need to tell you something." My stomach dropped. She was leaving. Of course she was leaving. People always left, one way or another. "My lease is up next month," she continued. "And my landlord wants to sell the cottage." Oh. The word came out smaller than I'd intended. "So I've been looking at other places. There's a nice apartment complex on the other side of town. 2 bedrooms, very modern. But it doesn't have a view of the pine forest. And it's 20 minutes from the library. Which means I'd have to leave home earlier to get here by 8:30. And I've gotten rather attached to our routine." Relief flooded through me, so intense I felt dizzy. "You're not leaving town?" "Leave? Why would I leave? I've finally trained my morning library companion to share the newspaper. Do you know how long that took?" She smiled. "Though I have been wondering. There's a house for sale 2 doors down from yours." I stared at her. "How do you know where I live?" I asked Martha. "Of course you did. It's a lovely house. 3 bedrooms, beautiful garden. I looked at it last week, and the real estate agent mentioned you lived nearby. She said you were a pillar of the community." Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "I didn't mention that you're actually a chair tyrant." "Former chair tyrant," I corrected. "I've reformed." "Have you?" I looked at her sitting in her chair. Which was somehow also my chair now. Or maybe they were both our chairs, or maybe the whole concept of ownership had stopped mattering somewhere along the way. "Yes," I said. "I have." "Good." She picked up her book. "Because if I buy that house, I'll need someone to show me around the neighborhood. Introduce me to people. Maybe share a coffee or tea now and then. Outside of library hours, I mean." My heart, that organ I'd thought was permanently retired from service, did something complicated in my chest. "I think that could be arranged," I said carefully. "Though I should warn you, I'm not very good company." "Really? Because I've been having coffee with you every morning for months, and I haven't noticed." "That's different. That's library coffee. In neutral territory." "Ah, I see. So you're only tolerable in the library?" "Exactly. What if I risk it anyway?" I looked at her. Really looked at her. Saw the silver hair that caught the morning light, the smile lines around her eyes, the way she held her book like it was precious. Saw the woman who'd challenged me, infuriated me, and somehow, without my quite noticing when it happened, become essential to my daily existence. "Then I suppose," I said slowly, "I'd have to risk it too." Epilogue. The kingdom expanded. Eleanor bought the house 2 doors down from mine. I helped her move in. Well, I supervised while the young men from the moving company did the actual lifting. My role was primarily to ensure the furniture was placed correctly and to provide running commentary on the neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson at number 12 is the neighborhood watch, so wave when you see her or she'll think you're suspicious. I instructed as Eleanor directed the placement of her couch. The Johnsons at number 8 have a dog that barks at everything, but he's harmless. And Mr. Chen at number 15 makes the best dumplings you've ever tasted. He brings them around during the holidays. "You've lived here your whole life, haven't you?" Eleanor asked, smiling. "I told you that already." "I know. But now I understand what it means. You're not just from Pinehaven. You're part of it." "So are you now." "Am I?" "You bought a house here. You have a standing reservation at Betty's place. Marcus the librarian makes you custom book recommendations. You're part of it whether you like it or not." She smiled. That smile I'd learned meant she was pleased but trying not to show it. "I suppose there are worse fates." Our library routine continued, unchanged except now we usually walk there together, our steps synchronized after months of practice. Martha had long since stopped keeping score. The final tally, she informed us, was Eleanor 47, Arthur 46, though I maintained that at least 3 of Eleanor's victories were under disputed circumstances. "You're never going to let that go, are you?" Eleanor asked when I brought it up for possibly the 100th time. "Would you?" "Absolutely not." We still sat in our chairs every morning. Mine by the window, hers beside it. Sometimes other patrons would eye them hopefully when we were late, but they'd quickly move on when they saw the small handwritten sign Martha had made. "Reserved for the library's most dedicated patrons." Don't ask. One morning in June, nearly 6 months after Eleanor had first invaded my kingdom, we arrived at the library together as usual. But instead of reading, she was staring out the window at the pine forest, her expression contemplative. "Penny for your thoughts?" I asked, settling into my chair. "I was just thinking about the first time I sat in your chair. You looked like I'd committed an act of war." "You had." "I know. I did it on purpose." She turned to me, eyes twinkling. "I saw you walk in, saw the way you went directly to this chair like it was the only seat in the library. And I thought, now there's a man who's gotten too comfortable. So I sat down just to see what you do." "You're telling me this was all calculated?" "Not all of it. I did genuinely like the view. And the chair was comfortable. But mostly," she smiled, "mostly I was curious about you. The man who had such a rigid routine. I wanted to see if you'd bend." "I don't bend. I compromise. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Absolutely. Bending suggests weakness. Compromise suggests negotiation between equals." "Equals?" She raised an eyebrow. "So you're admitting I'm your equal now? In chair warfare?" "Unquestionably. You're a formidable opponent." "Former opponent." "Right. Former." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the morning light filter through the pine trees. After a while, Eleanor reached over and took my hand. Something she'd started doing recently, and which I'd stopped pretending not to enjoy. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For letting me invade your kingdom." I squeezed her hand, feeling the strange, wonderful weight of this new thing between us. This friendship, companionship, whatever it was we'd built in the space between 2 library chairs. "Thank you," I replied. "For invading it." Martha walked past, saw our linked hands, and grinned. "You two are disgustingly sweet. It's giving me cavities." "We're holding hands in a library," Eleanor pointed out. "How is that disgustingly sweet?" "Trust me. From where I'm standing, it's adorable." Martha paused. "So, when's the wedding?" "What wedding?" I sputtered. "Oh, please. I've watched this enemies to lovers arc play out for 6 months. I know how these stories end." Eleanor laughed. "Martha, we're in our 70s. We're a bit old for that kind of thing." "Speak for yourself," I muttered, then caught Eleanor's startled, pleased expression. "I mean, that is. I'm not suggesting." "Relax, Arthur. Your left corner's twitching again." "It's not." I stopped, seeing both women grinning at me. "You're both insufferable. But you love us anyway," Martha said, walking away still smiling. I looked at Eleanor, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "She's presumptuous," I said. "She is. We barely know each other. We see each other every day. That's different." "Is it?" I thought about the past 6 months. The way Eleanor had become woven into the fabric of my days. The way I looked for her silver hair the moment I entered the library. The way my house felt too quiet on the rare mornings when she was visiting her sister and I walked to the library alone. No, I admitted. I suppose it isn't. Eleanor smiled. That full, radiant smile that made me feel like I was 20 years old again and standing on the precipice of something wonderful and terrifying. Good, she said. Because I've gotten rather attached to you, Arthur Donnelly. Even if you are a chair tyrant. Former chair tyrant. Right. Former. She squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back, and we sat there in our chairs. Our chairs, both of ours, shared territory in a war that had somehow turned into the best thing that had happened to me in years. Outside the window, the pine forest stretched toward the sky, green and alive with the promise of summer. And inside, in the southeast corner of Pinehaven Public Library, two people sat side by side, reading companionably, their hands linked, their routines merged, their kingdoms combined. It wasn't what I'd expected when I'd walked into the library that snowy morning and found my chair occupied. But it was, I was beginning to realize, exactly what I'd needed.